Steve, Optus was offline yesterday, and the Restaurant and Catering Association of Australia says that it hit the hospitality sector really hard. Now, they've got over 57,000 restaurants and cafes in Australia, and they also just offering deliveries. So you can imagine the ripple effect of this. We know
Yeah.
that restaurant industry actually generates about 40 billion Australian dollars in retail turnover in this economy every year. So this is a massive impact. Let's
Yeah,
just
definitely.
quickly, yeah, let's just quickly listen. I want to listen to the association's Shirish Manikan, and he was speaking to Radio Adelaide yesterday. And then I want you to weigh in on this and get your opinion.
Yeah, cool.
We've got the same figures as you in terms of, there was some 400,000 businesses across the country, but the feedback that we're getting back from our members is that it really hit them hard. From the very word go in terms of walking in and trying to get coffee going and serving that. Of course, there was no facility in which to charge the customers.
Steve, an entire day's trade. I mean, this is damning.
Yeah, look, I mean, it was a real disaster, what's happened yesterday with Optus. And I think the impact is, there's lots of retailers, but there's a whole range of different businesses that were impacted by this, including, the likes of, delivery drivers that are out there using their mobile apps. Suddenly they weren't able to transmit data back to their central server of just giving updates on what's happening on a delivery point of view, receiving new bookings. There was just, a huge amount of issues that were caused across the board. And I think what it really highlights is, a business needs to always be thinking about what are the risks that are inside of your business and if things go wrong, because things do go wrong, technology breaks. And so what is your backup plan? And, if you're a retailer and you're receiving, large amounts of your customers paying by credit card, which I think, happens a huge amount today in Australia. Do you have a backup in terms of, one, the provider that you're using, but two, also, the network provider, and do you have that backup internet provider that you can use? And so getting that sort of additional SIM card, that additional device that's not using the same provider is definitely, I think, worth every money, because, this may happen again. And, what's concerning is that Optus hasn't sort of announced the cause of the problem, which is surprising. I think to fix a problem, you've got to know what the problem actually is. So they definitely know what the problem is, but they're being very careful around releasing that information. Time will come out. And so whether this was, an individual person's made a mistake accidentally and pulled the plug on something, or is there something, more severe? Was there another cyber attack that's actually occurred inside of Optus? So time will tell.
Yeah. And when you say a backup plan, that is not using cash. I mean, it's 2023. Nobody actually uses cash anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that is what's the real problem, especially for small businesses, because you don't carry. I mean, I can't remember when last I actually used cash.
Exactly.
You've got everything on your phone these days.
Yeah.
So that is going to be massive. And it was not for just a few hours. I think that is the most important part. It was for almost an entire day's trade. Now, what's going to happen then? There's a huge conversation online about this. Can they file for compensation from Optus? Between 80 to 90% of the businesses were down the entire day. Do you think that they can do that? Is it possible?
I would be surprised if the contracts that Optus has allows businesses to actually go after them for compensation. But I think there is something that's going to happen. Optus needs to be able to go back to their customers, say, hey, sorry, we screwed up. Like, there was a problem, there was a fault. Here's something, and we're going to discount, your day for that. They're going to offer something to their customers. I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as much as the impact that's actually occurred for a lot of these businesses that weren't able to trade. And I think it comes back to businesses need to expect that things like this are going to happen and plan for them and have the right systems in place to make sure that they can continue to actually trade. And so whether you're thinking about it's your internet connection, whether it's the software vendor that you're using, you need to be always thinking about what happens if this thing fails and how is my business going to be able to continue operating in that instance.
And I know with communication, for instance, such a situation can either be a complete disaster or it can be an ideal opportunity to show your customers what you can do. Now, I think in this situation, the communication strategy was completely non existent. I mean, not saying anything for a very long while isn't it doesn't make it, it doesn't cut that base.
Yeah.
So the CEO, tell us a little bit more, because under the CEO there was also a data breach last year. What do you think? What should happen here? Do you think that there will be, some action taken, for instance?
Look, it's always very difficult when, this is a critical disaster that's happened inside of a business. And so they will be very focused on like, can we get this up and running and how long is that going to take? And when do you start communicating? Now, I think they probably started very early on communicating that there was a problem, but they didn't come out with a lot of information. It was basically the system's down. We don't know when it's going to be back up and running. And probably they didn't actually know that was the answer. Like everyone was like, well, how long is it going to be? Well, they probably didn't know themselves how long it was because they hadn't actually identified the problem. And so, having the right systems in place, I'm surprised a business like Optus didn't have the ability to identify the problem really, really quickly. Most large organizations of this scale should have huge amounts of redundancy. The issue should never have occurred. There's always going to be areas where things do break, but you should be able to identify what that cause of that problem is very, very quickly. And they certainly weren't able to do that. Now, is that because they've had a huge amount, they've had, staff redundancies, they've lost some, key people that had a huge amount of intellectual property, or was it just that they were under a cyber attack? There's a lot that's unknown. But what is known is the communication was poor when they had the data breach. The communication in this instance was reasonably poor as well. And they didn't keep their customers up to date with sort of further updates. And so I think it's going to be a challenging time for Optus retaining their customers. This is like the second big thing that's happened. It's going to be a challenging time, I think, for the CEO, and I wouldn't want to be in her shoes certainly right now. And I think she's going to be under an enormous amount of pressure to resign. I think the board's going to be under an enormous amount of pressure. So I think it is very challenging, and going into a Senate inquiry now that they've just called today, definitely it's going to make it challenging times ahead.
Yeah. And just in terms of that trust relationship broken now, because I know that Victorian government is now reviewing its contract with Optus after this latest outage. So now there's going to be, the chain is broken. Now you don't know, when is it going to happen again?
That's exactly right. And, if you were able to come out and every technology business has outages, doesn't matter whether it's Amazon, Microsoft, everyone's had this happen. And the faster you can go out to your customers and say, hey, this happened, and this is exactly the reason as to why it's happened, then it gives confidence. Then the people are like, okay, we understand why that's happened. We know the reason. We know that that's not going to happen again. And it could be, that it was someone's made a mistake. Or at least if you can go out and say, hey, this has happened and this is what we're going to do to prevent it happening. But being able to do that really, really quickly is really important. I think the instance where, they had the data breach, they took a long time to come out and talk about that. They've taken too long even today. They should be 9:00 this morning. They should have been announcing to everyone saying, hey, this is what occurred yesterday. And we know exactly what happened and we know why this won't happen again in the future. And then there would be confidence, but they haven't done that. And I don't expect they're going to do that anytime soon. I think it's very, very challenging times for Optus.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. No, like you said, I don't want to be in that CEO's shoes today.
Definitely not.
Let's look at DoorDash. It's piloting a new feature to get customers to tip drivers. It's something that, all these companies are battling with, that tipping, non-tipping culture. But something that DoorDash is now doing is just before you pay and there is no tip, there will be a pop-up on your cell phone, for instance, or on your screen if you're using a desktop, to inform you that if you tip, the order might actually take longer. So it's making sure that when you don't tip, it's a conscious decision. You know that there will be an implication on your order. Do you think that DoorDash is making the right move, or could this actually force people to use another platform for their orders, like Uber Eats, for instance?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. Ultimately, you want to make sure that the driver's always remunerated enough to do that delivery. And if you don't, you're going to have a poor delivery experience. I think so they're trying to do the right thing here in making sure that does actually take place. But are they saying, well, they're paying their drivers too low, and so you have to tip to actually get that driver to actually deliver? It's an interesting one. I'm not sure that I would be doing it. I think I would always, you're adding a level of friction. I guess the cost that you're seeing that they're presenting is not the actual cost, because you're saying, well, you actually have to tip to actually get your product delivered. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the performance happens on that. In certain cultures, that may be okay, maybe not. Like in the US, like people are used to tipping on all the time, and that's just become part of their culture and is expected. In other parts of the world, in Australia, that's not necessarily the same thing. And so you're always expecting that driver's already earned a sufficient amount of money. It's the tip is more when you've had this great experience rather than actually just doing the job that they're expecting.
Yeah. Because, at the end of the day, some people also use a tip to say thank you for your great service. But what if there is not a great service? You can't give someone, a bonus before you even know what their outcome is going to be, their performance is going to be.
Exactly right. And, I think that's, I guess in the US market, it's slightly different, is that everyone's expected to receive a tip regardless of the experience that they've had. And then it's like, okay, you might get a 10% tip if it's just average, but if it's great, then you might get a 20% or 30% tip, which is, different in this scenario. Tipping ahead of receiving the service is definitely a bit unusual.
Yeah, there is also now a new trend, which I also just read up on this week, is that it's called the tip creep. And that's when customers are actually asked to tip, but even with no service they're being rendered, they believe that there's this social justice reason. And you can imagine in America as well, that it's part of the course. They don't want to tip just because they're being forced to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, look, I think... I think if you're a consumer and you're ordering online, you're having these delivery drivers, I always try and tip the driver, and I always try and make sure I have some spare change right by the front door. They don't earn enough money. They do a lot of hours in a car. They're spending a lot of time making sure parcels actually arrive. And so I think, putting yourself in the shoes of those drivers, paying them an extra couple of dollars really makes a difference if everyone actually does that.
Yeah. Let's talk about delivery photos. It sounds very simple, just to take a picture, but in fact, it helps to reduce the support contacts. Now, by making sure that the delivery driver takes a photo when the parcel is delivered and everything is in place, it will help you as a business to make sure that there is no customers coming back and say, where's my parcel? It was not placed where I asked you. All of that, it will cut that out. Now, UPS, for instance, says that 92% of their residential stock globally include photos that shows exactly where the package was actually dropped off. And it helps them to make sure that their delivery rate and all the calls that they receive, specifically to support from the customer care line, actually dropped by 15% by just implementing this, making sure there's a photo accompanied by the delivery. It's very simple. Do you think that it's going to increase productivity from the service delivery side?
I'm kind of surprised they're talking about this now. When we started to Zoom to You back in 2014, this was like one of the features that we rolled out day one. I think it's vital for every single delivery business to be able to capture that photograph at the time of the delivery, because it means you can send that information to the customer. You can have this record, the parcel's been delivered there. It's also really useful for if the driver's delivered to the wrong location, you can look at that photograph, you can go back to Google Maps, you can go to Street View, and you can actually compare that photograph to what their front door looks like. And so you can actually work out whether or not the parcel has been delivered to the right or wrong location. So it's really good for recovery when a parcel gets delivered to the wrong location. So the photo is, I think, hugely valuable. The other thing that is also really valuable is actually when you're using a phone to do that delivery from the delivery driver's point of view, is capturing the GPS data. That GPS data allows you to know that that's when they click the button to drop it off, that is actually that person's location. You can do some matching. And I think then the next stage of what we're seeing here as well is these photographs will be able to run through an AI engine with machine learning, and to be able to identify, was this placed inside of a tree, or was this placed in the front lawn rather than at someone's actually front door. And so I think that's where it's going to allow companies like UPS and others to be able to identify where there's deliveries that have occurred incorrectly by looking at these photographs and doing that through machine learning. So there's definitely, I think, some interesting things that are going to take place from taking these photographs in the future.
Yeah. And then it's also just making sure that, everybody takes a clear photo, because then otherwise it defeats the purpose, especially now with the seasoned workers coming on board, especially like Amazon and all of them. Yeah. They don't necessarily know all the, details and stuff that they have to do. There's not enough time to train them either. Right. What do you do? Right.
Yeah. So I think this is where I think we're going to see, in the short term, is that machine learning is going to come into play into this, and where you can actually be analyzing the photograph in real time and be able to present back to the driver and say, hey, this photograph wasn't good enough, and providing that education back to the driver. And I think that will then help improve the results, because ultimately if the driver just takes the photograph and, it's sitting the parcel inside of their vehicle, that's not going to help anyone. And so providing that education in real time is going to be really, really important.
Yeah. Tell us, we obviously using Locate2You software as well, that you mentioned, that also eliminates this confusion because there's GPS tracking and all of that. Yeah. Have you noticed from the customers that they also said that this simplify the communication between customers and business?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, from a Locate2You point of view, the customer can go through, the driver's delivering the parcel, they're taking photographs, but they can also answer like a series of questions. And those questions are related to, the service that they're providing to that customer, whether it's delivery or it's actual installation service or something along those lines. They can set up multiple questions with multiple photographs, allowing that information to get sent back into the office, and then being able to automatically send to the customer saying, hey, we've just delivered. Here's the proof of delivery information. Here's the live photographs. And if you can do that the minute that parcel's actually been delivered, it becomes really valuable. From the customer that didn't receive the parcel, they might be at work and they look at those photographs and go, actually, you've delivered to the wrong location. They can go back and actually let that company know. But also knowing that that parcel's sitting at their front door, maybe they might get home a bit earlier to actually make sure they capture that parcel inside.
Yeah. Let's look at last mile delivery. I know everybody's asking this all the time. When you need to cut a little bit in your budget, where do you start trimming? But last mile delivery and its costs. One solution to reduce this cost is the transportation costs. And especially with this, the experts say, you must focus on middle mile first. There are often hidden costs and throughout the entire journey. So if you want to cut costs, look at your middle mile first. Why is middle mile so costly, Steve?
Yeah, so when you think about delivery, and let's say you're a large e-commerce or retail business, you're moving that product to a distribution center or a warehouse. And so you're moving a large amount of product typically. And so that's usually, it could be like number of pallets, or it could be a full truckload of freight. So the value of that total transaction is going to be much, much larger. So if you can streamline or improve that operation, then you're going to be able to reduce your overall cost of the middle mile. And so that's going to be, at a large scale, that's going to be expensive. And so if you can reduce it, but then you start looking at your final mile or your last mile, and sort of, what are those individual delivery costs? And the closer you can get your parcel to where your customers are, that actually reduce what that last mile delivery is going to be. And so, where customers are doing large amounts of volumes, there's lots of things that you can be able to do to have multiple warehouses across, even in the same metro area, but in different metro areas across the country. Really allows you to actually reduce that delivery time, but also the distance and cost in delivering that parcel to your customer.
I read somewhere that in the food service industry, last mile actually accounts for 40% of the total cold chain logistic costs. Do you agree? Is that true? Because that's a massive chunk.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely, a very expensive part of it. And part of that is because you've got these individual shipments that need to be delivered to these individual customers. And so, it's smaller, lots smaller transactions, but a lot more of those. And so they all, there's time turning up to that customer's location, parking, getting out and delivering that parcel. When you're thinking about delivering, a large pallet or a truckload, you're turning up it takes, it may take you slightly more time in unloading that truck and whatnot, but the total value of that transaction is a lot higher. And you think about when people are actually ordering e-commerce products online, the value of that item, the cost of the delivery is still the same, whether you're ordering a t-shirt or a $3,000 laptop. People will be happy to spend more money for getting that laptop delivered versus that t-shirt, yet the cost of actually running that delivery is exactly the same.
Sure. Oh, that's ridiculous. Thank you so much, Steve, for all your insight analysis and taking us through the wrap of this week's, I almost said last mile delivery, but that's what it all comes down to, right? Through this entire journey of delivering e-commerce. Any last remarks from your side?
No, look, I think, I feel for the CEO at Optus there. They've had a very challenging day yesterday, and I think a challenging few weeks ahead. And I think it's a reminder, not just to be hating on Optus. I think it's a reminder for all businesses to be thinking about the redundancy they have sitting inside of their business across all of their technology infrastructure. And I think, let's take that as a learning for everyone to think about that in making improvements in thinking about that redundancy inside of their business.
Great. Thanks, Slan. That's the end of it. Yeah. Thanks so much. Cheers. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, Mia. Thanks, everyone.